Hi, I'm Jennifer Bangs. This is a podcast called She Bangs, Marriage, Adultery, Texas, and Jesus. I wrote this podcast for people that are fighting for their marriages alone to give them hope and also to talk rather candidly about adultery and affairs. So this is episode 5. I always invite people in my episodes to grab a glass of anything to drink. So today I have lemonade, and we're going to journey into episode 5. My husband comes home. Maybe.
Oh, she bangs. I'm wasted by the way she moves. No one ever looks so fine. She reminds me that a woman's got one thing on her mind.
Welcome back to She Bangs, Marriage, Adultery, Texas, and Jesus, a totally spiritual but equally foul-mouthed podcast about marriage, mistresses, and possibilities. I'm your host, Jennifer Bangs. Years ago, I ran a ragtag social club in Los Angeles called IGTS, IGITS. I'm going through shit. We were all women with husbands who had left us, and we all wanted to save our marriages. We met every week, poured wine, and shared stories. When my husband first left me for another woman, I was on my knees every night praying my husband would come home. I told myself if he ever did, I would write about it. And he did. So I did. And the book draft sat on the shelf for 2 years because, though he was home, I knew the story wasn't over yet. And then I had an affair with a married man. And the dusty memoir went into the garbage for what did I have to say about marriage anymore? And then, as time went on, I thought, wait, actually, I have a lot to say. So, grab a glass of wine or whiskey or vodka or beer or lemonade, and welcome to IGITS. Episode 5, My Husband Comes Home. Maybe. Someone's head resting on my knee, warm and tender as he can be, who takes good care of me, oh, wouldn't it be lovely? Last episode 4, left off with me hearing my husband say those 3 little words I hadn't heard him say in the better part of a year. It floored me and also delighted me. I'd been fighting so hard for a chance to be a family again, and those words gave me enormous amounts of hope that maybe, just maybe, this ship could turn around. He uttered those words as I flew back from a terrible weekend in Florida, him being dissed by his entire family, banning him from his favorite sister's wedding, and him dissing me at his high school reunion by telling no one I was his wife, just Jennifer. So I got drunk and hit on his ex's husband and I guess a woman too. I don't remember any of this. Anyway, my husband James said these words as I was getting on a plane to start rehearsals out of town in San Diego for My Fair Lady. I hadn't been on my own, single, working as an actress in years. It was kind of great. Kind of freaking great. I missed Andrew and I kind of missed my husband, but I certainly didn't miss the shitty 9 months I just gone through, crying into my pillow about my shattered life. It was summer and the sun was out. Well, the sun's kind of always out in Southern California. And James seemed to be warming to me and things were pretty rosy. And getting to play Eliza again was pretty awesome. The last time I had done this show, I was pregnant with Andrew, though I didn't know it at the time. I just remember thinking all the time how exhausting the role was, not knowing that I was making a human while I was also making music of Lerner and Lowe. I still didn't know I was pregnant, even though my white fitted ascot dress, the exact replica of the one Audrey Hepburn wore in the 1964 film, was getting harder and harder for my dresser to zip every night. I finally figured out I was pregnant as I cried tears of dismay, staring at the 2 pink lines in an Albertsons bathroom I ducked into to prove everyone was wrong that I was not pregnant, that it was just a stomach virus. It was not a stomach virus. It was Andrew. I get on stage every night after this discovery and think about my little peanut during the song, Just You Wait. I wondered if he or she could hear me. I wasn't sure, but I thought of the baby at that exact moment every night. Some of the cast I'd worked with years before, and it was a lovely reunion. A lot had happened in 4 years. The biggest indicator was my Mrs. Pierce, who, like me, was reprising her role. After our first dress rehearsal, she commented to me backstage, "My, how this Eliza has changed. She is much softer this time around. She is quite beautiful." She put to words how my personal character had leaked into my stage character. My Eliza's edges had softened because my edges had softened. This particular production of My Fair Lady was being done at Starlight Theater in San Diego. This next part has nothing to do with my marriage, but being that the Starlight has permanently closed, I would like to pay it homage as it has become part of my life story and the theater has its own wild story to boot. When Starlight was first built in 1935, it was an outdoor amphitheater seating over 4,000 people, surrounded by the lush greenery of Balboa Park, home of the famous San Diego Zoo. A few years after it was built, the San Diego International Airport changed its flight path to fly its planes directly over the amphitheater, which was not too far from the airport. The planes flew low. So low, in fact, you couldn't hear a damn thing on stage when the plane flew over. So, the theater owners got creative and erected a working stoplight in the orchestra pit. Whenever the stage manager saw a plane from afar making its way towards the theater, they would turn the green light to yellow, and all the actors on stage and the conductor would be warned the deafening sound of a plane's engine was about to commence. Once the plane was nearly directly overhead, the stage manager flipped the stoplight to red, and all action on the stage froze. Like mid-sentence, mid-releve, Simon Says sort of stop action. Once the actors could be heard again, the light would flip to green and everyone would carry on. The audience went nuts over this real-time, wild compilation of live theater and modern life. It was quite the surreal feat to be playing an early 1900s flower girl before electricity or cars were much in use, trying to respect the actor's fourth wall while still keeping an eye out for a 21st century metal stoplight in an orchestra pit, telling me when a plane was about to fly overhead, forcing me to literally freeze on stage. At first, it was completely disorienting, but then once you got the weird hang of it, you'd start to mess with your fellow castmates, and when the yellow light came on, you'd either rush through your lines or slow it down to fuck with the other actor's next line, who'd then have to deal with the airplane pause. It was quite fun. The rule was you'd never stop mid-big musical number because there was no way dozens of dancers and a 20-piece orchestra could all stop in unison. But in the talking bits of the show, everyone could stop. And you could also stop in the middle of a solo, and this was the golden ticket, because if a plane happened to fly over at just the right time, you could have some pretty remarkable moments. And I got mine singing Just You Wait, as Eliza imagines all the ways she would watch Henry Higgins die. At the climax of the song, she yells to a line of rifled assassins, "Ready, aim, fire!" James and Andrew would come down every week or so that summer and visit me. I had a nice suite in a hotel, so our time together was really lovely. James was falling back in love with me. The whole summer was glorious. I started asking him more questions about the previous months. He was at a point that he'd answer everything I asked him, and because he'd answer everything I'd ask him, he'd sometimes pause and ask if I really wanted the answer. Because the thing about getting answers about your husband's affair, you cannot unknow that shit. And sometimes maybe there are some things better not knowing. But sometimes there were things my imagination conjured up that seemed likely far worse than the truth. Or there were things I just wanted to know, like, what did you get the Canadian for Valentine's Day? Flowers, he said. Flowers? That's it? I wanted to say. Flowers were so typical, so boring. They weren't wings. James told me about the first time he kissed another woman that year of testing the waters before the affair. He said he bawled. He said it was the last time he cried. He'd gotten drunk and kissed 2 women and then was disgusted with himself. He dry-heaved all the next day and left the conference early because he just wanted to be with me. He said the next year was about mustering up and being an even better husband. Cue the festive birthday gala under the stars with his rich toast of my splendor only months before he left. His musterings obviously didn't hold up. One day in between shows, we were at the hotel and I was taking a nap. When I got up, I walked into the living room of the suite and my husband was watching women's volleyball. Here he was watching her fucking sport in my hotel living room. I was sick and furious at the same time. And these are the moments of trying to patch up after a tear like that. These were the moments of hurt that kept hitting me in the face. Hard. And then we'd have really good moments. Like one day lying in bed, post-coital, I felt so good, so happy. Then immediately, heat rose to my eyes and I had to stuff tears. I felt so broken and betrayed. I lay there looking at my husband thinking, it'll never be the same again. He'll never love me the way he used to, the way I long for. And as I was thinking this, James squeezes me tighter and whispers, I love this girl. I love this girl. My heart melted. It was a reference to the first time he'd ever said that, before he'd started telling strangers we'd pass on the street. The first time it was in a car 4 years earlier. James sat in the driver's seat wearing his puffy black and green vest. We just celebrated our first Valentine's Day together, and he had told me he loved me. As he drove me home, banging the steering wheel with glee, he shouted at the top of his lungs, I love this girl! I love this girl! The summer rolled on. James and I were connecting. Things were good. Then one day in bed, he found a lump in my breast. I went to the doctor in LA, and he was concerned. He sent me to an oncologist, and he was concerned. After a series of doctor visits, mammograms, sonograms, and MRIs, my oncologist felt it was best to have a biopsy done. I felt pretty alone during this time. It was nice having a husband back in my bed that he could discover things like this, but because James was not fully back with me, I felt cheated that I didn't have a loving partner while I wrestled with the threat of cancer. This same summer, James and I found ourselves in 2 separate lawsuits. One was against his former roommate turned employee of mine who tried to steal my little boutique photo organizing company James had started for me years before. Because this nasty woman had been such good friends with James and had been my employee for almost a year, the fact she'd stabbed both James and me in the back was upsetting and uniting. Having a common enemy is certainly one way to build camaraderie. The other lawsuit involved a client who currently is divorced and dating one of the richest men in the world. And that little tart at the time refused to pay one of her bills. So I took her to court. James asked me beforehand, are you sure you want to sue her? Her husband is one of the biggest talent agents in Los Angeles. I thought twice about it and then answered, actually, yes, I don't care who she's married to. Bitch better have my money. I guess having fought so hard for my marriage, I was empowered to take on whomever it may be. And since James had helped me start the company, he had skin in the game too. And by the way, both ladies lost the suits and the lump was benign. As the summer rolled to an end, My Fair Lady closed and James said he was canceling his lease. Not even 3 months ago, he'd signed a 1-year lease, and now he was canceling it and wanting to move back in. It was awesome. So James moved back in, and it wasn't a difficult transition. I was already used to him spending the night there, and since I had been away a large part of the summer, he'd been staying at the house a good portion too. Part of James moving back in was realizing we needed to find a new counselor, as his batshit therapist wasn't doing it for me. We were introduced to a man one of my IGOTS friends had found. We were told he was once the head of the Department of Psychology at UCLA, had a doctorate from USC, and was also a Christian. We sat down on his couch one September evening, and I asked him a few questions to get started. I heard you used to be head of psychology at UCLA. No. Oh, well, I guess I heard my friend wrong. Then you taught there? No, I got my bachelor's there. Oh, okay, well, we were also told that you had a doctorate from USC? I never went there. Oh, I didn't even bother at this point to ask him if he was a Christian, as his name sounded undoubtedly Jewish. Okay, well, since we're in marriage counseling, let me ask, are you married? No, divorced. Oh, my dear God. Well, do you mind telling me why you got divorced? Yeah, I don't know. It was really weird. But I live with my girlfriend and her teenage son. Get out of there right now, pay him the $150 and just leave. But we didn't. And within 5 minutes of talking with this guy, a floodgate of light bulbs poured from the heavens and the whole room was illuminated with epiphanies and revelations. Dr. Golden was brilliant. The very first session, he asked why we were there. My husband answered that he had left the marriage, we were back together, but that he was still wrestling with issues of the past year. Dr. Golden told him I'd be fine if he divorced me. I mean, I don't know you that well, but I can just tell looking at her, she'll be fine if you divorce her. The fact that Dr. Golden was not a Christian was key. He wasn't going to tell James he needed to stay with me from a moral standpoint, that he should choose to stay with me not because his Christian upbringing would wag their finger at him but because he wanted to. James had never had anyone in authority tell him he could divorce me and it would be okay. And once he got that permission, it was like the shackles came off and he was like, wait, I actually like her. Dr. Golden then turned to me. Why are you here? Well, I answered, because I'm having a really hard time trusting my husband again, and I'm really angry. The anger, he said, will go away with time. The more things go well between you two, the more the anger will abate. But the trust? I don't think you have to trust your spouse to have a good relationship. It was a full-on, record-screeching what the fuck in my brain. No, I said, no. That goes against everything I've ever believed and still believe about love and trust and marriage. No, that can't be right. And even though I fundamentally disagreed with him about the subject matter of trust, he was so confident and so dead on about everything else that I thought maybe in time I could understand what he meant. It took me an entire year to figure out what the hell he was talking about that first session. And it was this. You don't have to trust your spouse to have a good relationship. You have to trust yourself. Don't trust your spouse because he is your spouse or because you've labeled him a good guy or because you want him to be a good guy. You trust him because you trust yourself and your instincts about what he's saying or doing. Don't trust him because you want to trust your husband. Trust him because you trust him. Good Lord, a revelation to be sure. I had doled out trust my whole life to anyone who had a pulse, and I was learning that trust should be earned, not automatic. Golden. Even though James and I were starting the long process of healing in these counseling sessions, I still had lots of questions and hurts. I knew I had to be strategic with the timing, though. The last thing I wanted was to send James off into defensive land, not because he deserved being handled with kid gloves, but because I deserved answers. I decided the best way to voice my hurts or questions was to write them down on individual pieces of paper. Anytime I had a thought or a feeling I wanted to express or a heavy question I wanted to ask, I'd write it down and put it in a large glass bowl that sat on our fireplace that was decorated with candles I'd let melt all over the red brick. The bowl would sit there, and anytime James was feeling confident in his abilities to love me well, he'd take out a piece of paper and address it. The rule was he had to answer it honestly. And so, having the bowl there prominently displayed my prominent grief, but with an understanding that he could answer it in his timing. Sometimes he'd blast through several questions, crumpling them up in victory. Oh, that's an easy one, he'd say, knowing the answers were better than what I feared. One night towards the end of September, walking out of counseling, it was dusk, and as the therapist's door shut behind us, James put his arm around me and said the sweetest words I've ever heard. Thank you for staying married to me, Jennifer. To this day, in all my life, I have never heard greater words, for in them was a recognition that I did this, that we were together because of me, that all my tears and pain meant something. They added up to something, and they had led us here, together. And he was happy, and so was I. If I lay here, if I just lay here, would you lie with me and just forget the world? Let's waste time chasing cars around our heads. A couple weeks later, it was October. We were nearing the 1-year anniversary of when this horror show began. I was cleaning up behind the dryer and discovered a pair of hot pink women's thongs. They were unmistakably not mine. James got home from work and I confronted him. His face got flush. He looked panicked. I don't know whose those are, Jen. I really don't. Oh, come on, James. Then where would they have come from? Now, I must pause here and say that I knew where they might have come from. We had just bought a used dryer from a female friend, and it was possible they had inadvertently made the trip from her house to ours in the transfer of the dryer. I was not, however, going to let James off the hook that easily, and I thought it a good idea to use this pair of underwear as evidence to coax out any wrongdoing he may have been up to. I was still struggling with trusting my husband too easily, so I went against my instincts and pressed on. He continued denying he knew anything about them. You haven't been with anyone else again, have you? No, I swear I haven't. You haven't been talking with her again, have you? No, I promise, no. I don't believe you. I totally did. No, I haven't. You're lying to me. I really didn't think it was lying. No, I swear, Jen. Now, I should also pause here and say that as I'm questioning him, everything in me believes him. But I heard this small little voice inside me that kept saying, don't stop, keep asking, don't believe him. I don't know if the voice was from God or just my subconscious, but I kept asking despite me wanting to stop. I pressed on. You mean to tell me you've had no contact with her or anyone else whatsoever? No, I promise. I don't believe you. I totally did. Well, okay. Wait. What do you mean, okay? Well, yes, I've had some contact. I mean, I didn't talk to her. She left me a voicemail, but when I heard her voice, I immediately deleted it. That's it? Yes. You sure? Yes. I don't believe you. I totally believed him. Well, okay, no, that's not all. What do you mean that's not all? Well, she emailed me on her birthday 2 weeks ago, and I so much wanted to hear from her that I read her email, but I didn't respond. I deleted it immediately after. And with that, I told him to get out. We had made an agreement. No contact whatsoever. I understood that he couldn't control her actions, but it was also understood that if she contacted him, he was to delete, not listen or read it, and tell me immediately. He hadn't done either of those things, so I told him to get out. He begged to stay, and so I let him for a day or two. Then it was Monday, counseling day, so we talked it out there. It was then in counseling James revealed he didn't know if he wanted to be married to me anymore. This shocked, confused, and beat my already pummeled heart. I had been chewing on whether I was being too harsh telling him to pack up, but when I heard him admit he wasn't even sure he wanted to be married, I kicked him out. I explained that I would either be a married woman or a single woman, but that I did not live with men that I was dating. If he was still in date mode, and I know this sounds ridiculous being that we were married, but if he was still in date mode, then I was not interested in cohabitating with him. If he wanted to date me, he could live somewhere else. If he wanted to be married to me, he could live with me. And I also emphasized the fact that he had lied to me. He needed to know I was serious about not having any contact whatsoever with this other person. And the fact that he had read her email, didn't tell me, then lied about it was not showing good face. And I did not have patience for that anymore. I never asked him where he went. I think various friends' couches or maybe just one friend's couch as he didn't have any friends anymore. But he was gone again nonetheless. I still saw him every day when he came to put Andrew to bed, but this time the tables were turned. He had to prove to me that he wanted to be there. He had to commit to ending all communication, being honest if that was upset, and wholeheartedly wanting to work on our marriage. He didn't have to have all the answers, just a desire to work things out. And if he could meet all those things, he could come home. And 2 weeks later, on election day, he did. It was a brisk LA evening. I was dressed in an oversized gray sweater with black tights, wool shorts, and black heels. I looked and felt great. James, Andrew, and I went to Starbucks and drank coffee and apple cider, then came home and watched the new president of the United States. His was a campaign about hope, and it sure felt like it that night. They say it takes about 2 years to heal, 2 years of really working at it to feel normal again. And they say if there is any contact between the adulterous parties, then the clock sets back to 0 and you start all over again. That is why I was so adamant that James have no contact with this person, even just reading her emails, because that opens up feelings and thoughts and possible contact that needed to be cold cock stopped. Since I believed that James was being honest about wanting to come home and not contacting this person, and because this person clearly had not gotten the message about not calling or emailing him, I decided to email her myself. I created an email address, jenniferblovesherhusband@gmail.com, then emailed her from it. Dear Canadian, my husband has asked you to stop contacting him. You haven't. I, as his wife, am telling you to leave our family alone. I love my family, I love my husband, and I am learning to forgive, and that includes you. Do not email me back. I will not read it. We never heard from her again. I should probably take a moment to address people like her and forgiveness towards them. It's hard. I really don't know what to say about it. I hear people say forgiveness frees you and how important it is. I know that forgiveness includes not wishing that other person harm, and though I don't wish this woman to be beaten or burned or maimed or anything like that, I do hope she gets what's coming to her. I do hope one day she gets married and her husband cheats on her with a younger, beautiful woman just like her. I want her to see how it feels and to know that's what she did to me. Is that wrong? I don't know, probably. But how do you forgive someone who willingly, deliberately ripped your marriage to threads, yet never met you at all? I did nothing to her, yet she did so much to me. I wish for her in existence. I don't wish her to die, maybe just to yield ever being a person, to go away forever. Forgiveness takes time. It's not a one-time thing and then you're done. I think lots of times you have to forgive and keep forgiving, even if it's over one offense. I think you sometimes have to keep forgiving the single offense over and over because it hurts you over and over. So where does that leave me? I don't know. I'd forgiven my husband because I loved him, but I hadn't completely forgiven her because I didn't love her. But then Jesus says to love our enemies. Oh, God. I spent some time looking up forgiveness and found a booklet written by a man from Christchurch, New Zealand named Dick Tripp. That's some name. Here's what he said. To give a simple illustration, if someone breaks a precious heirloom of mine and I forgive them, then I am offering to pay the cost, whether it be the price of the replacement or of the loss. It's interesting that the Hebrew word for forgive means two things, to remit a debt and to pay it. It is the same word for both. Mr. Tripp goes on to quote another writer, M. Scott Peck. For the healing of evil, he notes, a willing sacrifice is required. He or she must sacrificially absorb the evil. There is a mysterious alchemy whereby the victim becomes the victor. I do not know how this occurs, but I know that it does. Whenever this happens, there is a slight shift in the balance of power in the world. Oprah says forgiveness is giving up the hope that the past could be any different. This quote was based on a guest she had in 1990 that said forgiveness means letting go of the past we thought we wanted. All these quotes helped me start to wrap my mind around what it means to forgive. I'm still learning. James moved back in, and that first Christmas back home was profound. Remember the nice flight attendant's husband I sat next to the year before who liked my story and gave me his business card? I had been hoping and waiting for this moment for a year. I fished his card out of my toiletry kit and emailed him. I told him that as I was writing him, my husband and mom were on the living room floor playing cards, laughing and drinking wine in the house I grew up in. As I composed the email, thinking over the last turbulent year, I hit send and found myself wanting to go upstairs to my old bedroom and be alone. I climbed the steps, walking into my room and sat down in the dark. I drew my knees in and just smiled. My miracle had happened, and I wanted to ponder and reflect on that. And I wanted to do that not with my husband, but with the one person who had been there the whole time. My God. It was weird. I dreamed of that day and thought if that day ever came, I'd never want to leave my husband's side. I'd want to put my head in the crook of his arm, laughing softly and whispering to each other how far we'd come. But instead, I found myself in my old room with the lights off, just sitting there, thankful. So very thankful for a God who had stayed by my side and never left me, who had spoken to me every day and encouraged me every day and strategized with me every day. and won my husband back. It's true when they say it's often harder once the spouse comes home. I could never really understand that because I couldn't imagine a greater pain than knowing your spouse was out having an emotional and sexual affair with someone else. I thought your spouse ending that affair and coming home would be a lifelong celebration. Only after James returned would I understand what people meant when they say it's harder once they come back. When James was gone, all I wanted was for the affair to end and him to come home. That's all I wanted. And I prayed and worked for that every day. He had given me no choice but that he was gone. I had no say in it. He was out. Then, when he moved back in, I suddenly had a choice. I wasn't being told, we're over and there's nothing you can do about it. I was being told, here I am, now let's work on us. And I suddenly found myself wondering if I really wanted him back after all. And when I'd start to think maybe it would have been better for me to have let him leave, or maybe I should leave him, I would look at our son and know the answer. He wanted his daddy and mommy together. As time wore on, my second thoughts about our reconciliation dissipated. James and I were really mending and growing in our marriage and in our commitment to each other. We had a deeper connection than we'd ever had, and I started to understand the strength that comes from brokenness. The bones grow back stronger, don't they? James and I were falling in love with each other in new ways, and we were doing so well. I felt really, really good about our relationship. A year passed. Things were continuing to get better and better, and I felt so hopeful for our future. As time wore on, I needed a break. From James, from the work, from the house, just away. It was the first time in 2 years I was choosing to go be by myself for a time. I flew back home to Texas for a sort of regrouping and recharge. Nothing profound happened in those 10 days, but it was nice to get some breathing room. I left Texas and made my way back to California, and when I returned home, I got pregnant. Tune in next episode, episode 6, To Russia with Love. This is She Bangs, Marriage, Adultery, Texas, and Jesus. Find me on Twitter at Jennifer Bangs or shebangs.com. Cheers. Until next time.